Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Talent Ways Show. As you know by now, we are on a mission to find out whether or not Talent Ways exists through research, through statistics, easy for me to say, and of course, brilliant guests each week on this very show, the Talent Waste Show. What is talent waste? We believe talent waste affects organizations across all industries, and it occurs when an employee leaves an organization prematurely due to the business not being able to retain them. We've done some fantastic research and statistics around this very subject over the last couple of years or so. And between 30 and 45% of employees leave organizations within the first year, which is actually staggering. And that was from the Office of National Statistics. And Harvard Business Review also states that 80% of employee turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. So at the very front end of that hiring journey, 80% of the turnover is due to bad decisions, which is quite flabbergasting. There's lots of different reasons as well, and we want to get that into that throughout these series of shows that we're doing. During Series 1, we spoke to industry leaders about their experiences within talent waste and how they've managed to navigate and, of course, deliver some excellent initiatives to combat what is becoming a bit more of a pandemic within our industry. We have some fantastic guests lined up for this second series, and I cannot wait to share them with you as well. I know that they're waiting patiently. So, but you can catch up on the show via Crowdcast, via Spotify, if your format is audio. Of course, if you want the video version, go on to @Phoenix51 on our YouTube channel, or you can check out my LinkedIn page as well, or the website phoenix51.io, which obviously is our main sponsor. Let's get to it today. I am delighted to have a guest who has, well, let's be honest about it, simply worked with some of the biggest organizations around, from Sky, from Michael Page to JP Morgan as well, all the way through to Nortel, where he finds himself as global head of talent acquisition for the digital transformation giants. I'm excited to have with us Dan Cairns. Dan, welcome to the Talent Ways Show. How are you getting on?
I'm good. How are you, Lee?
Really, really good. Thank you. Really, really good. So, Dan, a lot of people know you as Dan or as Danny, and obviously quite prominent as well on LinkedIn and the social channels around transformation within talent acquisition. But for those of you who haven't met you before, tell us who you are, what you're doing, and what you're getting up to.
Yeah, cool. So, Dan Cairns, as you said, currently global head of TA for Nortel, but before that, I've done 20 odd years, I suppose, in talent acquisition as it is. So a long time, as you said, starting with Sky back in the days where we didn't have ATSs, so spreadsheets and 120 roles as a recruiter. And then actually I did a load of sort of corporate roles and decided probably in the more recent years to start to go into more SME startup world, which is where I probably sharpened my teeth quite a bit. So, you know, the subject we're talking about today, that become very important when you're working a bit closer to the bone of the financials in an organization. So, yeah, so that's a bit about me, I suppose. Only other background, I'm part of the RO100. I've helped run other sort of TA forums in the past, and in fact, I'm quite pleased to say that I ran my first event since lockdown just last week. So,
nice,
yeah,
nice. And it went well.
Yeah, it went very well, very well, almost too well.
Oh, that's really cool. Now we were talking in agreement before, and you know, I don't want to bamboozle everybody with facts and figures and numbers and that type of stuff, but to put it into, you're quite humble, put it into context of what you're doing now. You are the head of global talent for Nortel, and I think you operate in 7 different countries now, Dan? Is it? It's over 1,700 headcount. So
yeah, I mean it's 7 different countries. It actually goes a bit wider. My team's split across 7 countries at the moment. The organisation operates throughout Europe, Middle East, and US. There's actually sort of 23 offices in total that they sort of operate across. So it's quite widespread, and it covers everything. I mean, it's digital transformation, so there's everything from sort of government bodies, healthcare institutions, medium businesses, Fortune 500 companies, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. And some of the challenges that not necessarily face in your role now, but that you face in your career, has there been sort of any patterns of challenges? You know, like it's obvious to our viewers and listeners today that, you know, we're going to have some global economy challenges after COVID, and obviously what's going on with the war in Ukraine and, you know, Russia, and that's obviously a whole new different ball game. But certainly when you're coming back into these shores and you're looking at the economic climate, there's some key challenges. But do you think that there's been patterns over your career in any industry or the business you've worked in around kind of that talent acquisition space?
Oh, completely. The more common ones, and I hear the phrase, I want to get a seat at the table, it almost drives me nuts. So I think in TA, you can actually end up becoming this bit of a master slave thing. So I think a lot of businesses, even to this day, can't really define what talent acquisition is. And it's just recruitment, right? And that's how easy it is. So why do we need these people? But funny enough, you still need to pay people like me to come and join you to actually make it better. So that's probably the first one. It's more, I still think a lot of businesses haven't really worked it out. Look, for me, it's dead simple. And it's part of the reason why I came into a professional services organization. We should be treated almost in exactly the same way as your sales function, but just attracting different things. So that's probably one of the trends. I think the other thing that I found is over the years, TA's got a habit of over-engineering stuff, right? We don't try and we always over-justify things. And again, it sort of links into the subject matter for this podcast. So we've not really been data orientated. We've sort of led with emotions. You've gone to your managers and said, I can't do that because experience tells me I can't. Managers don't want that. They want data. And that sort of leads on to this final bit. Well, there's probably two final bits. One is the fact that TA isn't particularly data driven in most organizations. Everyone says they are. Everyone in TA says they're great, but we all know we've all got similar issues, but we're not data driven. And I think finally, going back to that, the value of TA, you tend to find a lot of functions are massively under-resourced because they are seen as this very superficial delivery function. And 9 times out of 10 in-house functions don't necessarily get the resource or investments they need.
I want to explore that actually, that final point, if I can, Dan. That's really interesting to me because most people know that are following me or follow my career that I've got 22 years recruitment experience as well. Now running a technology business called Phoenix 51, of course, and that providing that data around people. But what I always found with when in-house or talent acquisition started to become a bigger thing, I was still flabbergasted with, I'd speak to organizations, I'd speak to people like yourself, like global heads of talent or, people within the HR transformation piece. And they'd say, I've got a team of 2, or I've got a couple of recruiters. Where I think you're hiring like 300, 400 people a year, or you've got a staff base of 15,000 people and you've got a team of 2. Is that perception changed? Is it almost been a kind of, because we outsource, generally, because we outsource our recruitment functions so much, we don't need big TA teams? Is that a trend that you started to see that's changed? Or I know you've got quite a big team, right, compared to the numbers we're talking.
I've got between 50 and 60 people across 7 countries, so it is a fairly sizable team. I think in answer to your question, it goes in cycles. So if I look at the beginning, let's be honest, there's this metric that we tend to look at that's cost avoidance in TA. And I stress to everyone, stop looking at that metric, right? Because you're not appearing on that's not appearing on a balance sheet for an accountant. So companies got to ramp up and they do one of 2 things. They either expand their TA teams dramatically, they throw bodies at the solution knowing that's cheaper than an agency cost. No disrespect to my agency friends. But it is. But then what happens is they get to the end of that cycle and they look at their P&L and they all of a sudden have gone from TA is going to save us this much money to actually there's a big overhead, right? Yeah. Only I'm going to be a pain. My dog wants letting. Give me a second.
the joys of working from home.
I know, exactly.
Good there. Here he is.
Sorry. There you go. This is Eve. So yeah, where was I? Yeah. So the accountants then look at these balance sheets again, and they just see an overhead instead of a cost saving. And the problem being is when you look at that sort of cost avoidance stat that people keep hankering back to, it appears nowhere, right? So you need to look at cost per hire. So what I've noticed more often, what started to happen, there was this either peak or trough of resource, and invariably it ended up under-resourced. You then had another issue where organizations about every 3 to 5 years would completely outsource the whole TA function to an RPO, which might be the right thing to do for certain organizations. But eventually they would bring it in-house again for the very same reasons as what I've just talked about. One of the things that I started to do in my last organisation, well, not my last one, the one before that, the last one I was in house at, I worked down a hybrid model. So it was almost on the basis we appreciate, and we talk about data here. So we want TA to be more data driven. I want the bloody business to be a lot more data driven, because planning wise, most are pretty poor at it, right? So what I did was I brought in this almost semi RPO to bolt onto the team, so that if we have a peak in hires, we're able to dial up or dial down that resource whilst protecting the TA headcount. So I think what I'm seeing is more and more of this hybrid type approach. Now, I said I brought it in. Isn't me that did it. It just sort of started to happen in the industry. So I don't think
it was you, Dan. I'm
not the pioneer. Trust me, I'm not the pioneer on that one. But it works, and it does work, because it's a good way of protecting the in-house headcount, but whilst protecting the payroll by having a team that you can dial up and dial down. So I'm seeing more and more of a trend of that right now.
No, it's really interesting for me. I've never worked in house. I was lucky enough in a previous life, I suppose, when I was working for one of the big giants, really. That we put an on-site team as an RPO, I suppose, or managed service on-site team at Centrica. And so I saw the inner workings. Part of my team was working on site, so I saw the inner workings of how that TA function could work, even though it was still outsourced. Does that make sense? But you never saw it from the other side, which is getting your perspective is interesting. And you've mentioned actually a couple of times already now that kind of data-driven approach. How important, Dan, is it to you moving forward that we start to take a more data-driven approach to talent acquisition and ultimately people coming into our business?
I think it's imperative. I know that sounds really extreme, but it's absolutely imperative. And why do I say that? I learned quite early on that, I was one of those recruiters bleating, don't do it. Manager does it, it goes wrong. I told you so type thing. And it doesn't work, but it also doesn't work for if you want to show value in TA as well. So for me, I'm quite lucky in the type of industry I'm in, which is professional services. You can hardline the activities of TA to the bottom line of revenue and EBIT and all the rest of it. But actually, most TA functions don't look at it that way. And this is really important, because there's a number of things you need to be able to do. Is one, an organization, you need to get data on where their activity is and what they're planning on doing. If you're a product company, what products are coming, and therefore what's going to impact headcount, both positively and negatively. For me, what clients are coming, what's that sales pipeline looking like from professional services, and can we track both the talent and the sales pipeline right the way through to the point where the talent pipeline's almost ahead of the curve. And I don't think many have got data that's sophisticated enough to do that at the moment. We don't. I'm going to be honest, it's something we're working on right now. I'm only week 13, so but in short, really imperative. But it doesn't just hit the planning piece, it hits everything else. And let's be straight, I had a conversation with a peer of mine just last week at that event, and he said he couldn't understand why they were having such turnover in the first 5 months. And I said to him, have you looked at your TA and your onboarding processes? And he said, well, I just thought it was the managers not being that great. And I went, could be, but have you looked at your data? Have you understood where the candidates are coming from? Are you looking at the conversations, the interviews, the whole journey? Because if you get the right data from that can sometimes tell you what the problem is.
I could not agree more. And, it's really interesting to me, and I get on my soapbox foot, and I know you know this anyway, Dan. But the reality is that we use data in every other part of our life, right? We use data to measure how many people like us on social media, for example. That real granular little thing of how many likes have I got? We use data on or key metrics on how much we should put marketing spend wise, from data analytics on marketing. We do the same in sales, which is quite interesting around tracking that pipeline that you just talked about within TA and also professional services TA piece and that sales side. And I still can't get my head around, even today as we're talking, as we're doing this show right now, I still can't get my head around why organizations around the world will still not look at data to bring the most important asset into their company, which is people. Most organizations don't have an organization if they don't have people. And that might change in 30 years' time when everyone goes AI. But we're way ahead, we're way behind that, yeah. And so for me, I just find it really simple to go, let's get some data and some metrics around some key things that we need in our organization. And like you say, track that, because actually you'll be able to pinpoint along the employee journey or the the recruitment journey. You'll be able to pinpoint what's going wrong. And typically, I found in my experience, and hand it back over to you, it's not just one thing, is it, Dan? It's typically a few things that go wrong, and that's what we've got to fix.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, when I think about, and I'll talk about, my thinking at Nortel. So Nortel has grown exponentially over the last year or so. Like we're not bulletproof when it comes to the economic downturn, but actually there's so many points we can take from data-wise sources that can actually help this organization do well. It's doing really well at the moment. TA function's phenomenal. But actually, if we can start tracking the data, we're about to implement a new ATS over the next sort of quarter. We start that data right from day one, and we start to link it in with sales, our internal resource planning, and people development, compensation and performance, all that stuff. That works really well. But there's a piece before that as well. And I think people forget this. So planning aside, because I'm going to be honest, most organizations can't see past the next 3 months. Let's be straight, especially at the moment.
Yeah.
So actually, if your TA team has been given the right investment, you should absolutely have at least one person in there in your sourcing function or research function that does nothing but research, analytics, that sort of stuff, because they should be starting to inform, especially in my industry where sales and TA can be so linked. They should be starting to inform the organization what organizations are doing, what globally, where skill sets are sitting, where are we seeing higher quality coming in different, different countries, different regions, different organizations, and start to build these patterns and trends up around what's going on, because that doesn't only help talent and where we should go, it should also help our sales function, right? To start to say that how can Nortel help wider organizations? And I've done that with other professional services, but then jump into the piece that's really relevant to you. If you've done enough research, you start to build and nurture your pipelines, and you get the data around that. And this is no different to managing a sales pipeline. I mean, you know this, Lee. Sales pipeline can take ages. We might be recruiting developers, but they'll drop in and out of those pipelines all the time.
Yeah.
So if we can spot the reasons why they're dropping in and out of them and start to work out, is it something we're doing right or wrong? Are we attracting the wrong people, the right people? Then we feed it in then into the recruitment machine, if you like, at that point. And this is where, and I'm really, it's the usual, I'm going to be really polite here, rubbish in, rubbish out. There we go. I'll use that phrase, right? So if you look at an ATS as a basic database, right? If your recruiters aren't using that properly, tracking the stages that the candidate's going through, make sure that candidate experience is being managed right the way through, it's really hard to monitor that dropout rate as you go through it. And that links into ED&I, that links into, what your ENPS is going to be, you name it. But if you're tracking that right the way through, and you can start to build trends as that ATS is getting bigger and bigger, you're starting to understand what success looks like from top of pipeline to top of funnel to bottom of funnel. And then you go a step further. And I've not seen anyone do this particularly successfully yet. And there are some that are, but for me, that data is only the start of the story. So a bit like that colleague of mine that was asking why we're getting dropouts at 5 months. I'm like, well, surely you're either telling one story in the recruitment process, and then it's another story when someone comes in.
Very common.
And let's be honest, don't get me on employee experience, because I had this conversation recently where people were mapping it from the time someone starts. I'm like, no. Do it from the beginning, right? So do it from the attraction stage. So if you can then map that, but then you can go. Sorry, Siri wanted to join the call. So you can then go a step further. And actually start to look at your performance and attrition and start to try and link that back to what you're doing within your pipeline to understand if that's having an impact both positively and negatively. And for me at Nortel, this is the bit I get really excited about. I'm no data geek, right? I'm a people person, but I see the value in it. And if I can nail it at Nortel, I'm not just helping TA, I'm helping the organisation. TA can become seen as a revenue generator off the back of this, right?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to interact with you there. I mean, you've some amazing points, and I think that revenue generator piece, where we're just going back to the point you made before about actually when we're pulling our TA teams together and they're looking, the powers that be are looking at the balance sheet or whatever, saying, oh yeah, we've got an asset, and then all of a sudden when we're not using them, oh, it's a cost, let's get rid. So we have that cycle. If we can start to not prove, but if we can start to show that the TA function is actually an asset from a generating of a revenue perspective, how you just, we've done loads of research on this particular subject, and actually, if you hired, I'm not saying Nortel, but just Company X hires this year 200 people, and out of them 200 people that in this particular calendar year, as given by the Office of National Statistics, at least 30% of them are going to leave. That is a national statistic, right?
That's astounding, right?
Yeah. 30% of them are going to leave. That's based on the CIPD's cost associations and everything that we've worked out. That's about £750,000 worth of cost that you're just literally burning.
Yeah.
So when you're just talking about cost in that scenario, it could be 100 people that you're hiring, 30% leave. You're talking about 350 grand, 750 grand if 200 people that you're hiring, 30% leave. If we can start to change the dial on that retention number, so from 70% retention to 75 to 80 to 85, we're actually generating revenue to a certain degree, or certainly saving costs. But it's a hidden cost because no one kind of sees it. What they see is, how can we drive better people? How can we beat this war on talent? When actually what we could be doing is going, if we had a better candidate experience and employee experience, and we got people that joined the organization for the right reasons, culture, values, competency, behavior, that type of stuff, we can start to monitor them data outputs. We're going to give ourselves a chance of driving that 70% to 80% to 85 to 90%, and we're actually generating cash or saving cash. So it's quite staggering. I mean, when we done this research, Dan, I was like, we've got to quadruple check this, because it kind of doesn't make sense, because 200 hires to some global outfits is just, it is almost like their attrition, right? Let alone growth as well. It's quite staggering numbers, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it drives me nuts, because what you see is, you're right. I think they compartmentalize the different parts of the process without linking them up. That's the first mistake, right? The other thing is, organizations need to get away from this. And no matter how good they paint the picture, you could be the best culture, and you could have TV ads of people screaming out your name that you're phenomenal, right? But the truth is, you need to start to understand quite early on, what is it I want out of an employee that's going to come to join us? And how's that employee going to help us? So if you're a product company, you want someone that's going to help you deliver quick, that's going to be productive, that's going to be high performing. So what needs to happen at the beginning of that journey for us to get that end goal? And I don't think too many people piece that together. If I look at a services company like ourselves, again, it's a bit easier, because what you're looking at is similar things again, but actually, can we get our hiring processes quick, slick enough, engaging enough that we're hiring the best engineers, the best whatever, to come in and therefore be active, working for clients, doing some of the great transformation quicker, because that results in revenue. And I think organizations chunk it up into short-term bits. And that's the problem, because they're only seeing it through different lenses at different stages. Actually, it needs to be an employee life cycle, from attraction to exit, and what are the points along that impact that experience.
I love it. Data-driven approach across the employee life cycle. Absolutely love it. Look, we're just going to go for a break of the session. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Dan about the movement around early careers, and if we can't find people, how do we grow our own? I'm going to get a little bit of fun with Dan as well. What your best hire is, what your worst hire is. See if Dan will reveal that. We're back after this.
Phoenix 51 is a powerful employee technology enabling organizations to make data-driven decisions at every stage of the employee journey, from hiring through benchmarking and development too. The platform provides detailed analytics on the most important asset in your business, your people, enabling organizations not only to make the correct hiring decisions, but also how to benchmark, train, and retain them. Phoenix 51, powering your people decisions through every part of the employee journey.
So we are back. Nice one. Bit of advert break in the middle from our sponsors, of course. So Dan, before the break, we were talking about tracking the pipeline. We're talking about data-driven approach across the employee life cycle, as well as that recruitment piece as well. And it kind of struck me as well. Some of the work that you're doing right now at Nortel is obviously attracting them people into the business, and of course they are engineers or developers, as well as other people, of course. When you can't find people, what's the approach been? Not just necessarily maybe at Nortel, but through your career? Because again, I hear a lot, and I've worked on the other side of the coin here, trying to find a unicorn, right? Trying to find people that just literally don't exist for clients or whatever. What's your approach from an internal perspective? When we can't find somebody, do we just throw more money at it, or do we change? Like, what do we do to try and fill that gap in our business?
So there's a utopian answer to this, and then there's a real answer to this, right? So there's, the real answer is what I see is businesses tend to make a lot of mistakes. Again, TA tend to bleat. We know we can't find this. You're looking for 3 people in one job description, but aren't doing any mapping or data mining on markets to be able to prove that fact. So I think when I look at it now, the ideal approach to this, when we've done this in the past, when using the right tools and the right analytics, is to be able to go into that intake meeting at the beginning and actually manage expectations properly. So don't kick off a piece of recruitment just because a manager says, I don't care, just do it. You need to be going into that intake meeting with data analytics, sample profiles, real view on how you can actually hire. Now, the worst thing a lot of managers want, depending on the environment, is you take this almost waterfall approach, right? We get this many CVs in, review, interview, review, interview. It's rubbish. It doesn't work. Take an iterative approach when you're looking at hard skill sets. But I think the key thing is setting up that data from day one. So you can go in with the reports that are telling you this is where the data is sitting at. These are the salaries they're sitting at. It could be location, skill sets, whatever that you're getting. You can get tons of tools out there that can get it, whether there's 1 or 2 that you pay a lot for, there's some that you pay little for. But you go into that first meeting as a talent advisor, and as cliched as that sounds, that's what you are. And I beg to anyone in TA, you're not there just to fill a role. Okay, you're not. Those days are gone. You're there to advise. And that sets you up at the beginning, because if you have any issues, right, some managers, let's be straight, they're going to tell you it's urgent. They're going to tell you it's don't care. They're going to tell you that's what they need and tough. So the only thing you can do is to go out and do it, but keep data in the center of it. Because you've now warned them that developer come tester come waitress he's never going to be the hire, right?
Yeah.
Is not there, and you've got to gather that data. And the only way to really then, if you know it's going to be awkward, you should be having regular catch-ups with the hiring managers anyway. But each week, I'd be sending a data dashboard, just high level, to go, this is what we've found, here's the risks. We need to talk. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. Yeah, sometimes hiring managers are right. They might come, but you might surprise yourself and come back and go, wow, there are a few of these. But 9 times out of 10, it's not the case, and you can go back with the data. And I think you've got to be strong enough then to say, look, what we're seeing in the market is this, and this, and therefore we need to change the job description and our approach. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting 6, 12, 18 months. I think my longest hire was 2 years.
Wow.
Years ago.
And what was that like, Dan? That longest hire piece, just kind of briefly the story behind that, because there'd be a lot of people watching and listening to the podcast now that will be thinking, how can a hire manager wait for 2 years? But equally, in the comparison to sales, as you made earlier, for the right person, you are willing to wait for the right sale. Sometimes sales cycles are 18 months, 2 years, whatever. So what was the story behind that? And was it a key hire?
That was a particularly, that was some sort of IT auditor that had to have some sort of specialist skill sets. I think the manager, based on previous experiences, just was willing to wait. As a recruiter, that's soul destroying, right? You see, when I finally filled that role, I think I went out on the round down that evening with a few people. It was like a massive celebration.
Days going out. Love it.
I mean, that was back in the days when LinkedIn had only really just come in and stuff like that. So it was quite early days. I mean, I'm showing my age here, but yeah, it's soul destroying. I don't think it's good for any manager. I think the other thing that I go back to that revenue generator thing. What I've done with some organizations is I've said, look, you not having that person in seat, it's costing you this much per day.
Yeah.
Now, it might be hard to quantify that because you'd be surprised the amount of finance functions that can't work that out for you. But again, in the industry I'm in, I can look at their rate cards and say, like, each client, they charge this much per day. So I can say, like, we either look for the unicorn and you lose, I don't know, 12 months worth of revenue, or we start to look at people that are good at this element and we can develop the rest, and you've got them there in 12 weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And do you find as well that what I found really interesting about that part as well is that the TA is an advisory function. That there's a lot of organizations that will have a TA, an internal recruitment function, and I'm not saying they won't respect them, but actually they're there to fill the needs of the hiring community, when actually what they are there to do is as advise and guide the hiring community. Because actually the hiring community, with great respect to them all, they're not necessarily got their feet, on the ground, or their ear to the ground of what's going on in the market. So, we need to be able to advise and guide, but also, that talent pooling aspects that we haven't touched upon yet, to be able to go back to our talent pool and know if we've nurtured a pool of, I don't know, developers or, whatever it is, that we can go back and talk to them and keep nurturing them so that when we have that need, they're ready for us. Is that kind of how you see it as well, Dan? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's absolutely the way I see it. I think that there are still too many TA functions out there that just do that reactive delivery, and they're almost starting from scratch every single time they hire. And let's be honest, every organization, and I've been mainly tech aligned over the years, they'll have core skill sets to look for. If you can have the right timing, right team set up, you can be pipelining these skill sets all the time. Now, ideally, what you want is a really good sourcing team, because they are a slightly different skill set that are out there hunting the whole time. They're your lead generators from a recruitment perspective. And if they're able to nurture and build those pipelines, then you're not going from scratch. You're actually talking to the managers about ongoing data that you're finding, and you're going to them with sample profiles. So that can then really reduce your time to fill, your time to hire. So instead of starting from scratch, I've had it on one case where we had pipelines built up and we suddenly had a role filled within 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
What would traditionally be a hard role to fill. Sorry. Sorry. It was a go out. Give me a second.
No problem. That has to be that has to be like almost like your standard, or your gold standard of actually that talent or that talent function. And like you say, a lot of people don't actually look at it in that way, or they're led by the hiring community, which to a certain degree, of course, we've a lot of us have been hiring managers, and therefore we know what we want. We're hiring right now at Phoenix 51. We're hiring, and we've got this exact scenario happening right now where I'm the hiring manager, and it's quite easy to kind of be on the other side, isn't it? Go, I want this unicorn type individual, but the reality is that, like you say, if we don't hire somebody for 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, whatever, what damage is that happening to us? And that's not a sales ploy to get somebody in and do a deal. That's actually an understanding to say, is it not better to have somebody that you can nurture and develop whilst they're there than have a blank hole sitting there for 6 months? And that's the communication that you need to have, isn't it?
And let's be honest, everyone's got this view of, I want the best, right? Everyone wants that. Everyone says our bar is high. I hear that in every organization I go into. Okay, what does high mean to you, right? What does it mean? But the other thing is,
what does good look like, almost, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And there's this other thing, and again, when you look at talent wastage, if people are constantly hiring at this level, the attrition after about 12 to 18 months is going to go like that, right? It's going to, because they're hiring these top people who aren't going to get fulfillment after so much time with the organization. So we need to make sure we're getting the full spectrum of experience, and that's a win-win then.
What's your view, Dan, on kind of early careers? My background, I'm pretty passionate about the early career stuff and the raw talent stuff, whatever. But do you feel, is it specific for certain sectors or industries, or do you think that has a big role to play in that kind of long-term position of talent acquisition and certainly employee experience and that type of thing?
It's interesting because bigger companies have started to split TA and early careers apart, which I think is a bit nuts. Don't get me wrong, TA tends to have an involvement in the attraction of and sometimes the engagement of academia, but actually you see some of the big corporates have completely separated it out. But my view here is you've got to take quite a holistic view. So you should absolutely have early careers. If you look at the UK and even Europe, we've got so many entry points now. So there's foundation apprentices, there's degree apprentices, there's graduates, there's almost return to work type setups as well. And if you've got these people coming in, the key thing is that you've got your people development plan solid behind it. And you should almost be hiring at that level or the next one or two up all the time, so you're never having to hire that top level. So if you've got the attraction process and the development process going in, it's feeding that pipeline the whole time. But that takes proper data and that takes proper succession planning.
Yeah, and I think that for me, again, just interweaving my experience with yours, I totally agree that, you know, there's a lot of organizations that like the thought of that, you know, developing their own talent, growing their own, if you want to call it that. And I do think that that sector, that market has changed exponentially over the last kind of 10 years for sure. You know, when I first started Raw Talent, for example, it was just grads. Now it's not. It is genuinely early careers, which is fantastic. Still need to change hiring based on a CV, and let's hire based on values and cultural behaviour. Of course, that's the drum that we're.
That's not just early careers. That goes across a spectrum, to be honest.
Exactly that. But I do think that, again, a little bit like we said earlier, like that kind of goes around in cycles. When the market's hard or difficult or tough, well, when you think about COVID, when COVID hit, and then everybody now is scrabbling around after COVID for really good people, really good talent, and that, you know, that whole kind of war on talent, if does it exist or not, what, you know, that's a whole new debate. But when the market gets tough as it is now, most organizations are competing with other organizations. It's not just even sector specific anymore. Yeah. It's actually, you know, we all need developers, so let's go type thing. Yeah. And therefore, if we're not creating our own developers, where is the next tranche coming through? And actually, could we invest some time, some effort? And it is time, and it is effort, and it is cash. But could we invest that in developing our own engineers or our own early careers programs, so that it starts to breed retention, it starts to breed loyalty? People will stay, people will love what they do because you've given them the opportunity and you've nurtured them. You've actually molded them the way that Nortel want to be molded, or Samsung or Phoenix or whatever it is. So therefore, the statistics that we've got anyway show that actually, if you are driving early careers, the retention rates are much higher than actually if you're hiring people based on, you know, it works both ways, doesn't it? At the end of the day, if you lob somebody an extra 15% or 20% on their salary, whatever it might be, you know, the chances are that they're going to leave when somebody else does that for them. You know, exactly. So the cycle keeps going, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, that's where that war on talent becomes such an issue. So data-driven approaches around bringing that candidate experience, that employee experience, early career programs to develop our own, you know, having that process-driven approach, that talent pooling approach, so that we can actually start to learn and nurture where our next, you know, superstars, if you like, are coming from, are key points, aren't they, Dan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting when you say post-COVID, I think everyone forgot about data at that point because there was this bounce in the talent market. And it was, I almost think most companies, if you look at what's going on right now, most companies went too far, right? So, and you had this, I mean, you're right about the salary thing. I mean, some of the salaries that were being thrown about post-COVID, I memean, even in the TA world, they were seeing salaries that were, you know, astronomically above what they were. I also think when organized, like, we're in foreign territory right now when it comes to the economy. We've had COVID. We had the bounce back from COVID, and now we're going into another crisis. If nothing, I think the current crisis, and I'm no economist, but I think this is a bit of a normalization. This is the market starting to level out again. It's going to be painful, but I think, to your point, people just suddenly bounced back in an urgent way. It's like, we must have. So was it a war for talent? Yes, it was, but it was created by people being short-sighted and not data-driven, by letting go of tons of people too quickly. Now, I'm not saying that no one wants to lay people off, and some short-term small numbers you might have to do that. But what happened over COVID was massive cutbacks without any without any thought longer term for what could happen. And that's why we got the bounce back and the war for talent, right? That's exactly what
I completely agree. And what's interesting as well is that what comes off the back of that hiring or making them decisions that, you know, that to lay people off necessarily too quickly or whatever. Look, let's be honest, you can't blame anyone. We'd never been in that global pandemic scenario before, so it's very difficult. But actually, that loyalty piece is affecting retention now because people are saying, "Well, hang on a minute, you were quick to furlough me, or you were quick to put me out to pasture.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't I now?" And that's difficult, and that's why that's another area of that data-driven approach of saying who should we be laying off, you know, effectively, or who shouldn't we be? You know, just because Lee's been there for 5 years and Dan's been there for 6 months doesn't need to mean that Lee should stay. Lee might be worse than Dan, but we have got no data. We don't know.
Yes.
So that what we're going to do, we're going to make a decision as Dan, you're off, first in, first out type scenario, last in, first out, sorry. And therefore that has a detrimental effect when we do pull the teams back together because Lee's in the wrong position. Dan should have been in there. Dan isn't. The effect of the team is, well, hang on a minute, where's Dan gone? This is a bigger issue than just, you know, coming in and coming out. And that's the types of things that I think that we're talking about, isn't it, around that data-driven approach. It's not the data making the decision for you, it's the data helping you make a better decision. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you, let's be honest, a lot of times when it comes to making decisions around people, we tend to think more about number of heads and cost of salary than actually what, again, I go back to this, why you're hiring someone, what's the outcome you need? And that's the same, whichever decision you need, what outcome are you driving towards, what problem are you trying to solve? Because I don't think we even start to dig into that deeply in most organizations. We just knee-jerk, want to make a decision and we just go for it.
Yeah, no.
So that was a very broad brush generalization for me, but
no, I agree. Some fantastic points. I've got two more things to ask you before we kind of sum up. So, Dan, you don't have to name them all for what company either, but you know, have you got any stories around your best hire? Is there one out of your entire career that you go, do you know what, that individual was just literally a game changer? I'm so pleased I hired that person.
Interesting. It was I've been thinking long and hard on this because I knew this was potentially coming. So it was actually a TA person, right? I won't name the person because they're quite an understated individual and I wouldn't want to do that to them. It's someone I've ended up working with 3 times actually, since I hired them the first time round. And the reason it was good, right, was it data driven? When they first hired them, none of us really were working on proper data. I think I might have even had I won't name a Taleo system and shame at the same time, but it was one that wasn't well renowned at the time. Yeah. So it wasn't particularly great. But why was it good? I think in my head when I hired the person, they were quite understated in the interview, but there was something I could see about them that was just a bit different, something that could do something. And me and that individual went through quite some challenges through 2 or 3 companies. And in fact, my last in-house role, he took over my role when I finished up, and he's someone that has quite a transformational head on his shoulders. He's not quite as gobby as me, but he's a lot more analytical and knows his projects. And I think for me, I'm going to say this quite selfishly, he was a good hire for the companies. Yeah. But actually, for me in TA, he was someone reliable that I worked with, and you know, who knows, the time might come back if he's not learned his lesson the 3rd time round to come and work with me again.
That's it. Oh, I love them sorts of stories. They're fantastic. And I suppose finally, Dan, as a leader in your field, talent acquisition, you know, you've given us some fantastic insight. But what would you say, kind of, you know, your best bit of advice, I suppose, but would you give other professionals within your space the approach that's worked for you over the years and continues to work? What sort of advice would you give other professionals in your space?
It sort of goes twofold, but I'll try and keep it brief. The first thing is get on the same page as the business. In HR and TA as a whole, we tend to have our own language and we tend to think about what we want. So you've got to get on the side of the business. You've got to be speaking the same language, using their same methodologies so they understand what you get, because you'll get by a lot quicker. I think the second bit goes on everything that we've just talked about, and it's making sure that you're prepared with the data, you've done the research, you're making sure, and this works with business language, right? Because most businesses, especially in the tech field, if they can't deliver, they've got to be able to talk why, or if they can deliver, they've got to talk about how they're going to do it. So actually, it's having that ability to do it. And actually, for me in TA, I think it's a confidence issue. I think there's still that master slave thing. So you need to understand that, Lee, you might be Mr. Big Stakeholder for me, but you're still just another employee of the company, and I'm here to advise you. So have the kahunas, have the confidence to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was one of the key points actually that I pulled out of just our conversation this afternoon. Is that actually that advisory piece is really important, because it's not just about, the hiring community will appreciate more that advice and guidance and understanding, rather than just that person doesn't. Thanks for the job spec. That person doesn't exist, And again, I'm pigeonholing, but in between there. But a lot of that happens, doesn't it? It's very difficult sometimes. Sometimes hiring community or hiring managers don't want to hear that you can't, or you can't find that individual, because that's what they've got their mindset on. But the reality is that individual doesn't exist. Something needs to change, and we need to be assertive enough to actually talk about that, back that up with data, and then drive the new solution accordingly. So no, I totally agree. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I've been trying to get you on for ages, and so I'm so pleased to have you on the part of the Talent Way show. And just for the viewers and listeners, that are watching and obviously listening, where can they find you? Some obviously LinkedIn you talked about before, but where can they find you? Have you got any events coming up or anything like that at all?
I tend to. So, contrary to the accent, I'm based up in Scotland, so not easy to reach everyone down south. But I've not got any more events planned yet, but there will be quite a few in the new year. Normally done through either a local talent acquisition forum or DBR. Plus, you might see me at the Arrow 100, or I quite often go to events like Wreckfest and stuff like that. So, but you'll definitely find me on LinkedIn, and if anyone wants to chat TA, then I'm more than happy to do that.
Fantastic stuff. Dan, you've been an absolute superstar. Thank you again for coming on to the Talent Way show. And that's it. This is the second series of the Talent Way show is in full swing. Like I said to you before, you can catch up on all the shows via Crowdcast, Spotify, and YouTube. Just hit the sponsors following at Phoenix 51. It's all over there on the YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow Dan and myself on the LinkedIn and all of the different socials as well. I look forward to you all tuning in this time next week.